Okay, good evening, everyone. A couple of false starts there, so this is the fifth attempt at this lecture. This is British and American culture. We are now. I did not do the makeup lecture yet, so we are. This is actually week 9, and week 8 has not been recorded yet. So bear with me. The makeup lecture is on its way. I'm going to record that tomorrow night, and that will be just one video. It'll be long though, so prepare yourself. You know, a few weeks ago, I was doing the sort of 45 minutes to 1 hour lectures. I'm going to do that for the makeup lecture, so we don't have like 6 videos in 1 week. But this is our week 9 lecture, which is it's about the chapter entitled "A Tale of Two Empires" in the book. It's chapter 5, and we're going to talk about America specifically. In the makeup lecture, I'm going to talk to you about British culture too, because I'm going to talk about British culture more than American, actually, because the topic for the makeup for week 8 is imperialism and industrialization, and that happens in the United Kingdom first, and it actually starts before the American Revolution. So America doesn't exist yet when the Industrial Revolution gets going. So we'll handle that in the makeup. And today we're going to talk about the 19th century in America. Now, I realize my hair is getting out of control. It's been like 6 months since I got a haircut. My hair is longer than it has been since I was in high school, I think, or university maybe. But this is something. Some students have been asking about the fact that I keep trying to link American culture. Already I'm doing it. Why do we need to know about American culture in 1776 and in the 19th century? Why do we need to study this stuff? Why don't I just talk about America in the 1990s, in the year 2000, and since World War II or something like that? Why does this course cover such a long period of time? Well, because you can see that Americans in many ways have changed a lot, but in some ways are fundamentally the same. What did they do when they started to have a revolution? Every time they didn't just have one. We'll talk about others in a minute. But the first revolution, American Revolution, because there were other protests and revolts and such that went on. The English Civil War was arguably a revolution too, though it was short-lived. The American Revolutionary War has some of these characteristics that you see. Americans unwilling to go along with what the state or the government or whatever ruling power, they resist the control of any dominant culture. And that's a characteristic of being American. And it doesn't matter where you come from, because I have Korean American friends, and I have Chinese American friends, and I have Canadian American friends. And that's one of the reasons it doesn't matter what you look like. It's really something that it's kind of infectious that Americans don't like other people to tell them what to do. Okay? So that's sort of a thing that's going to continue to happen, is that they don't like other people telling them what to do. They don't like the federal government telling them what to do. They don't like the president sometimes telling them what to do. And the way that they handle it is sometimes by getting a gun and marching around and daring somebody to tell them to stop. Americans right now are literally gathering in groups of thousands of people with guns and signs that say, "I want a haircut." Right? They think the government should not prevent them from getting a haircut. Now look at me. I've been stuck inside doing my lectures and stuff for 2.5 months now. And it's a sacrifice to look like a shaggy fool, but it's not a big one. And do you really need to, is that what you're going to do? Like grab a gun and risk getting sick so that just so you can get a haircut? Is that worth it? I would say not, but I wouldn't tell an American that, especially if they had a gun. So you just can see, I'm not saying all Americans are like that. I'm just saying one of the characteristics of America, which we'll talk about, is this impulse. And I mentioned these 5 things already. And the first one was freedom. And their idea of freedom is different, but they all think freedom is one of the most important things. So they'll make any argument they want. You can spin it whatever way you want, but freedom is something that they all think is essential to the state, to their private life, to public life, to it's a natural right. Their freedom to do the things that they want to do and what they feel they need to do. Okay? Now, going forward, remember, I'm not doing a political history here. I'm not doing a history class at all. So frequently I'm just going to be talking about these sort of bigger ideas. One of my students, one of you, sent me an email and was asking me about Benjamin Franklin, and I didn't answer yet. And I don't want to make this answer long because Benjamin Franklin is now dead. We're in the 19th century and he's long gone. So, but just to respond to the question to all of you, Benjamin Franklin, what is his involvement in the Declaration of Independence? He was one of the primary editors of it. He made corrections to it. He was offered the job. He was asked to write it, but he didn't want to. So Jefferson did it, and as I said, the other older founding fathers in Congress and members of the Continental Congress, the representatives of each colony, they changed it. About a quarter of it was changed. But Thomas Jefferson, when it comes to the Declaration of Independence, I just want you to remember Thomas Jefferson is the man. And that's not 100% true, but that's good enough for our purposes, okay? And the student, I think it was a girl, not a boy, but a man, not a woman, asked also about Benjamin Franklin, what was he negotiating with the British when he was sent to the United Kingdom to negotiate? Well, he was the most, as I said, he was the most respected, accomplished, successful American. So he was sent, he was chosen to represent the colonies, and he was in favor of compromise. So he was going to negotiate a lot of things, mostly about if you're going to tax us, then you better give us the ability to govern ourselves and to vote on the taxes or have representatives in Parliament from the colonies. But he never got a chance to negotiate because they sat him down, and the committee that was supposed to interview him and negotiate with him just yelled at him for an hour. And Benjamin Franklin was surprised that this is what he came all the way to England on a ship for, was to be yelled at like he was a child, like a naughty boy who was not listening to mom and dad. And so he just listened to it, apparently. I wasn't there, but apparently he just listened to it. And after about an hour of that, he didn't say a single thing. He just took it and then got up and left and went back to America, and that was it. He was in favor of independence because he realized that if he couldn't negotiate, if they weren't going to take him seriously, there was no chance. There was no compromise, there was no negotiation. He basically realized that they were treating, again, like I said, they're treating the United States, it's not the United States, they were treating the colonies like they were rebellious children, like they were teenagers that need to be disciplined. And that's not what Benjamin Franklin was. He was a past middle-aged inventor, multilingual, successful businessman, politician. It was a big mistake not to talk to him with respect. And Benjamin Franklin never looked back after that because he was the one who went to France and secured the support of the French, which probably allowed the Americans to win the war. So that's a short answer to the question. You think it's long, but it's short. So that's, moving on, that's what Franklin's all about. So just focus on the things that I emphasize, and you don't need to know his whole biography. That's not necessary. So, the title of this chapter is A Tale of Two Empires. You will hear also that Americans, like the word empire is sort of an insult to them because they separated. They left the British Empire and they don't like kings and they don't like empires. But you will see, although they don't like the word imperialism and they're not an empire in the sense that they have an emperor. There's no empress like Queen Victoria or figurehead of empire, but they build an empire. They build a republican empire in the same way that Rome did. You know, officially it wasn't the Roman Empire, while Julius Caesar was running around fighting civil wars with everybody and taking over France and Britain and everything else. But the Republic had already conquered North Africa and it had already taken in territory, you know, from Syria all the way across. And even though it wasn't technically an empire, that's why it turned into an empire. Now, America has not turned into an empire exactly, but it functions a lot like an empire. So that's why I say Tale of Two Empires. A little bit of tongue-in-cheek there, and American readers might not love that, but it's not meant to be a restrictive definition. It's just saying that if you look at it, by the end of the course, you will see how you can just map the British Empire's fall and America's rise on top of each other. It was just like as soon as the British Empire fell apart, America filled the void and took over a lot of the same roles. So that's going to be part of what you learn, I hope, from this, you know, these 3 parts for week 9. And what you get from the makeup lecture, that all of this industrial power, political centralization, and of course the sea power, the navy of the British, and then the Americans is they're different cultures and they evolve differently, but they do have very distinct similarities that allow them to have similar, you know, global roles. America doesn't take the same path, but the end result is kind of this superpower, world police kind of role that both countries end up having a turn at. So we'll talk about that later. But for now, we got to talk about America awakening. So there is something called the Great Awakening, and it's not probably what you expect. It's something that everybody knows about America, that America has very diverse religion. There's all kinds of different religious practices in America. But in the beginning, especially, you know, on the political side, most Americans were not religious. The way that we've talked about British culture, the Puritans were very religious, but there was a lot of people, there was a lot of Americans who were more concerned with Enlightenment ideas. And we're going to have to talk about this in the makeup lecture too. But Enlightenment ideas really, it's a focus on reason, on human capacity for using knowledge and rationalizing and reasoning and making rules that Renaissance humanism is all part of this. It's all these ideas. A lot of them are from France, and although the French Revolution happened after the American Revolution, the Scottish Enlightenment. There's a lot of thinkers. You know, Adam Smith and the Invisible Hand. This again, I'm going to talk about this stuff in the industrialization and imperialism lecture. But all of these ideas sort of get mixed up and affect a lot of the ideas. John Locke is a very important figure in English history and English philosophy. And I mentioned, you know, I never actually used the cover of Leviathan for the lecture on Oliver Cromwell, but the cover of Thomas Hobbes' Leviathan is Oliver Cromwell standing with a sword in one hand and a scepter in the other, and his whole body is made up of tiny people, and he's supposed to be, you know, some sort of representative of the people, like the population is, and the desires of the population are one with him, and his body is the nation, not the body of the kingdom, because then he would be a king. But all of these kind of ideas are all getting mixed together, and the Americans take a whole bunch of pieces from here and there, and they stick them together, and then they make a country. It's amazing that it actually works, because it's just seems like the country would have ripped itself apart long ago, but somehow it's still together. This is still federal, organization of 50 states still persists. Sometimes I shake my head when I look at all the things that happened, but that's the way it is. So in the early 19th century, they have this kind of religious revival where it's partly because they start to make new versions. The Protestant religion starts splitting again. So there's all these different varieties of religion, and then they start building churches, and it goes from hundreds of churches to thousands of churches to tens of thousands of churches. And it's Puritans and Anglicans and stuff, but then the Catholics make their way over, the Irish Catholics, and there's a lot of tension between all these people, but basically religious tolerance becomes an essential part of, and it's weird because it's tolerant, but it's very religious. Like, usually when you're religiously tolerant, that means you're not very religious, right? That's how you make yourself tolerant of other religions, is that you're not that strict, or you're not that serious about it. That's normally how it works. If you're a Christian or Muslim or Buddhist or Hindu or anything else, but you're not, super dedicated and super focused on it, then it doesn't really matter if somebody is another religion. And you're like, yeah, that's cool. You be the way you're going to be. But if you're really devout, it's normally not the way that people lean when they're really, really dedicated. They want everybody else to be the same. And that's part of the reason that, there's so much religious conflict in the world, but especially in Europe. It's just like, I'm Puritan, and you're Anglican, and you're Presbyterian, and we can't get along. And you can't marry my daughter, or son, or just stay away from me. You do your stuff in your area, your church, and we'll do ours. But that's not really, that does happen, but the overall picture of the United States is that everybody has the right to practice their own religion in their own way. And politics is this, and religion is that. Don't mix the two of them, the way Henry VIII did. Remember that? That wasn't good. When you have a tyrannical king who's the head of the church and the head of the state, there's not really very much preventing him from controlling everything. So this separation of church and state is a fundamental thing. But even the president is allowed to be religious if he wants to. And I won't get into how politicians manipulate religious stuff, because it's not the focus of our class. What I want you to know, though, is in general, you as an American citizen, or as a person visiting America or anything else in America, you can be super religious or not. You can practice religion as long as you're not, you have the freedom. Again, this comes back to freedom, I suppose, is you have the freedom to practice religion the way you see fit. So America does have this religious rejuvenation where there's all these new kinds of, it's proliferation. There's new churches being created. There's the church, the Adventists, Seventh-day Adventists, and there's the Mormons and everything, and the Church of Latter-day Saints. There's all kinds of different versions of religion. And I'm not one to judge, but they do draw in certain types of people usually. But for the most part, they allow this type of personal lifestyle and belief and dedication to occur in a way that is admirable, rather than having a state church like the Anglican Church that forces everybody to practice religion in the same way. or they kill you, or they burn you, or they throw you in jail. Remember that? The 16th century wasn't pretty in terms of religious conflicts. So there's probably a lot of that being handed down, even with the Puritans who are like, oh, everybody should wear, dark clothes and nobody should have fun and everybody should work and Sunday you rest, but every other day you work and no Christmas. But over time they start to accept other things too. Basically, that's how it goes. So that's a great awakening. Now, rolled up in all this religious reawakening thing is the reason why the rejuvenation of religious behavior and is kind of tied to this idea that's very, very important to the United States. It just never goes away. Even in the present day when there's wars with other cultures and wars with Iraq, people in American culture, presidents and otherwise, just have a tendency to use this language where the American people are these chosen ones and that God is somehow a Protestant Englishman. That's what it goes like. This is going back again to the 16th century, but God is a Protestant American, or God is an American. This is what they believed. I said the city on the hill idea when they first came to Massachusetts, and the lawyer did the sermon and said, we're going to build a city on the hill and it's going to be the light of the world. This is the American idea that it is their destiny. They are chosen people. And so a lot of the things that happened in the 19th century revolve around this idea that even though most of America, as you see it now, is not theirs. In fact, it's more about like 10%. They really only have a sliver when the American Revolutionary War is done. They just have a sliver of land from the Appalachian Mountains inward and south to Florida. Florida is not part of America yet. So they go down to Georgia along the East Coast. It's really 10 or 15%. I'm not sure exactly, but it's a very small portion of what the gigantic territory of America is now. Hawaii is just another planet at this point, right? It's not even close to being part of America. Most of America belongs to the Spanish, and then the French, because Napoleon takes away Louisiana from the Spanish, and the natives. That whole territory doesn't belong to them at all, but they feel like it is their destiny to take it all. And a lot of the things through these 3 lectures, that's what we're going to talk about. The Civil War, we're going to talk about the Wild West, we're going to talk about the Gold Rush and other things too, where American expansionism is not expansionism the way that other countries have it, because they basically say they think of the territory as available because there's not very many people there, because the natives have 90% of the natives have died from diseases, and the Spanish and the French have not settled those areas in any real numbers. So they look at the territory as essentially theirs for the taking. There's really not very many people there. I always say this to my students from Asia. It's like if you went to Canada and you went north from where I'm from, like Toronto, and you went north, a couple hundred kilometers, you would just look around and be like, there's nobody here. Like this, who does this land belong to? It doesn't belong to anyone, really. It's called Crown Land, and it belongs to the government, but there's nobody there. And in the past, from the American perspective, that was the same thing too. Northern Canada isn't super attractive land. It's full of mosquitoes and rocks and super cold in the winter. But, when people went over the mountains and came into the Ohio Valley, and there was native people there, but there weren't very many of them, it just looked like they could just start a farm wherever they wanted until they did. So that's what Manifest Destiny is. I'll show, I don't need to show you. On the website, there's this kind of ghostly woman kind of floating over the landscape where the native people are kind of fleeing in front of them, and then there's railroads and cities and stuff in the background behind her, and she's just floating across, and there's all these settlers with wagons and horses and families, and they're all kind of just crawling along the ground, going westward. And this is just what happened. It was almost like Pac-Man, you know. Maybe that's a bad reference for people who are born in the year 2000. You know what Pac-Man is? It's like a big yellow guy who eats things. Anyway, they basically just swallow up the American territory, you know, mile by mile, kilometer by kilometer, until they reach the Pacific Ocean. And that's how the 19th century goes. By the end of the 19th century, they're in California and Oregon and Washington, and they're at the ocean. So, the third thing for today, the transportation revolution. Part of the thing that enables this American, you know, manifest destiny to take place, this desire for more land and this rapid, you know, acquisition or annexing or stealing. I mean, that's what I think the native people would consider it. It's just not theirs, and they just take it because they can, because they have more people and they have guns and organization that the native people don't have. So they just get cheated out of a lot of territory. Unbelievable amounts of territory they took from them. We'll talk about that this week too. Obviously that is a tragedy for an entire culture, not an entire culture, entire cultures. You have to remember the native people are not one group. There's more than 100 different groups of people. It would be like one group, one new country going to Europe and just taking the whole thing from everyone. And Belgium's gone, and France is gone, and Germany's gone, and Spain is gone, and Portugal's gone, Luxembourg, all the small ones, all the big ones, all the, you know, different types of people, they just get wiped off the map. And then there's a new country that replaces the whole thing. That's essentially what happened with the United States. The transportation revolution enabled an incredible amount of economic growth to occur, and this coincides with the Industrial Revolution arriving in the United States in full force. So initially, it was really trickling in, and the British were quite strict and quite careful and jealous. They jealously guarded their innovation and their engineering and their plans and their mechanical expertise. So, you know, basically, eventually these technicians and tradesmen made their way over from England to America, and they were not allowed to smuggle any pieces of machinery. They weren't really, they searched everybody and stuff. They didn't have any documents or plans. They just remembered how things were built, and they just came. Samuel Slater, I hope his first name's Samuel. Slater is one of these guys who comes over, and he knows how to build it in his head. So he comes to the United States, and he starts building, a textile mill so that they can process cotton in New England, in the Northeast, rather than exporting the cotton to the United Kingdom and having it processed and made into cloth there. They start having the mills, cotton mills being made in America itself, in the North. So the North starts to industrialize, and in the second lecture we're going to talk about the Civil War, and this is one of the things that marks the difference between the North and the South, is that the northern part of the United States has industrialized to a much larger degree than the South. The South is a plantation economy, and the North is an industrial economy by the time the Civil War starts. So this process happens. One of the great innovations that the British, came up with was the steam engine. And the steam engine allowed you, first actually, I should say, before the railroad, they started digging these gigantic channels, and they actually made a canal all the way from Niagara Falls, from Lake Erie, all the way to the Hudson River. So you could take a ship from where I'm from Canada, all the way down to New York. And that enabled, basically, it cut the price of moving things, because otherwise you'd have to, horses and wagons and stuff. It cut the time and the cost down exponentially. So you're talking about 5 times faster and 5 times cheaper. And so all of a sudden you can move all of these goods, all this food, all this grain, whatever products you make, leather, furs, whatever commodities or resources you're trying to move, you can move huge amounts of them faster and cheaper. And this is what the transportation revolution means. This is not in the textbook, by the way. This is the introduction to the textbook stuff. So this needs to go in the textbook in the 3rd edition, by the way. But the railroad makes it even easier, because you don't need, the canal can only... digging a huge canal for ships is a lot of work, and to maintain it, and you have to, whenever the water has to go down, you have to have a set of locks where you just lower the boat and then go to the next level, and it's a huge engineering project. But laying down rail and putting locomotives on it allows you lots more flexibility. So you can go, around mountains, you can go up hills, you can go down hills, and you can lay these tracks all over the place. So once that technology is there, the railroad explodes, and they build railroads everywhere. And suddenly there's 100 miles of track, and then in a space of 50 years there's 30,000 miles. It's just the amount of goods and people being passengers also, right? It takes a long time to walk from Washington D.C. to New York. It takes a long time to ride a horse or a carriage. But you can sit on a train, and it's not fast. It's not the KTX, remember. But you can sit on a train, even though it's going 30 kilometers an hour. It just goes 30 kilometers an hour for 5 hours, and then you get there. It might even go slower than that. I'm not actually sure. They go very slow, 20 kilometers an hour, but whatever. You ride a horse for 30 kilometers in a day, and then you can only imagine what it feels like on your behind. If you're riding a horse for 30 kilometers and you're riding for 6 hours, that I don't even know, because I've only ridden a horse for 30 minutes, but it can't feel good. So bumpy carriages, slow travel turns into all of this movement of people and goods and everything, and this enables this huge economic development to occur, and it makes people some people, not everyone, extremely wealthy, and it enables population growth. And as soon as you get a railroad, going through the Appalachian Mountains, and it goes to, Cleveland, Ohio, or something like that. As soon as that railroad is there, then a whole community grows up around that station. The same way we do now. If some of the most popular or desirable or valuable land in a city is right near the subway station. There's more people that live right there because you can just move or get stuff home that much easier. But this is much more important than a subway station would be. It's just no movement or extremely hard movement. I want to see my cousin in another city, but I can't. I go there once every 5 years. Or now it's expensive, but I can go there once every 6 months if I hop on the train, and then it takes me a day to get there. But I can hang out, I can get on the train, I can go there, I shouldn't say hang out, that's very 2000 or 1990s kind of language. I would go there and visit, and then be able to come back if I wanted to. So this transportation revolution contributes to this idea that, we have technology, we have the ability, we have been chosen by God, And the people that live here don't deserve it. They don't deserve the land, so it's almost our responsibility to develop it. This is the argument they start coming up with, is that essentially, because we're going to talk about slavery a lot in the Civil War lecture, that the white Americans in particular, white, rich, male Americans, are there because they're supposed to be there, and that America belongs to them for a reason. And it's because they have the ability to develop it the way it should be developed. And this is the argument they use to do all kinds of terrible things, because they're doing it all in the name of progress, or in the name of this sort of belief that they are the ones who should be responsible and they're the ones that should take control of everything. So this is something that's going to underlie the rest of this week's lectures. And you'll see how they still have a lot of this manifest destiny kind of attitude is still prevalent in the way that politicians and certain arguments are made in American culture about whether they should or shouldn't do something. Okay? So, that's the introduction. That's part one to A Tale of Two Empires. And we will continue. Remember, there's part two and part three coming later this week. And plus, there is going to be the makeup lecture in addition to the other two coming in a couple days. Okay? So, thank you for listening. And I'll see you again very soon. Have a good night.